on my 24th birthday, I received a letter from my dad, a Facebook message that was like in the form of a letter, where he basically gave me the ultimatum to either not return to Egypt, but that was one of the suggestions, but basically find a job that he can understand and one that feels like is honorable for a man and my family and my culture. And that, you know, came from just a lack of understanding for what the purpose of all that I'm doing is. And it's really funny that you had just mentioned the skinny dipping party, because that's that's the kind of disconnect that I'm like,
right.
My dad has a problem with me like hugging another woman. Like if he opens a video and he sees me hugging a woman, that's extremely, that's like, it's a very different background.
Yeah.
So you can only imagine like, even if we're doing it because we want to push people to be more open and more comfortable with discomfort, all of that, he doesn't care. It's like, to him that looks fucking awful.
Yeah.
And to him that looks like I completely lost my way and I'm a sinner. I'm like in the wrong direction. So I understood where he was coming from, and but I also understood where I was coming from very well. And I think in a moment of just expression. So after I got the letter, it was such a, you know, such a moment of turmoil in my life, and I needed to decide like what is it that I was going to do. In my mind, there was at no point that I was like, oh, let me consider what it would look like to not do what I'm doing right now, because it came from such a deep place within me that there was like nothing was shaking that, but it was more of, how do I handle the situation? How do I actually how do I respond to my dad, and how do I live this moment with where I was. I think I was 3 or 4 months away from doing the jump with Will Smith. It was like such a strange moment, because it was like the two extremes of all of a sudden this thing that we've worked on for like a couple of years now is being acknowledged by the biggest movie star on the planet, and we're getting to do something that has never been done before, and I'm the one that gets to do it with him. And it was like the product of this dream that I had, and like such a crazy story that feels like the pinnacle of, you know, success and achieving, you know, manifesting a dream.
Right.
But at the same time, like, the person who matters the most doesn't see any of it. In that moment, I decided that Yes Theory was people understood Yes Theory through these very positive, uplifting adventures and moments of getting with people and getting them to go skydiving on the spot. And I knew that what was happening to me was, and my determination to keep going in the direction that I, you know, had started is very, very important to share with people, because I wanted them to understand, and I wanted to remind myself that seek discomfort isn't to, you know, go on the street and ask someone to leave the country on the spot. It's going to be in moments like this where I have to stand up for what I believe in, and I have to stand up for the person that I'm in the pursuit of finding.
Yeah.
And you know, I was in the middle of I decided to make a video that shares what happened with the people that were watching at the time on Yes Theory. And in that video, I basically described what was going on, and at the end of it, I responded to my dad in Arabic. And I think the first thing that came to my mind after that, before I ended the video, was, be who you are and walk freely. I had never said that before. It wasn't something that I like. It felt like I just felt inspired in that moment to think that and be it.
Yeah.
And I, you know, shared the video, and and so many people around the world were resonating with the experience of having a disapproval from a parent or both parents, family in general, about what you're doing, especially people that look like us or first generation immigrants in the country, where, you know, and it wasn't just like Arabs or Muslims or people who particularly could relate to the specific cultural experience that I was living. It was like, you know, first generation Korean in the US, and he wanted to be a musician, but the parents were like, wanted him to be the classic things, like parents, you know, doctor, lawyer, all these things. And, you know, the Tunisian girl that had a French boyfriend that her mom disowned her for it, and being also so lost and not knowing what to do. Felt like so many people found camaraderie in the moment
Yeah.
of like me sharing it, because it just made people, and you know, in our culture you can't really, it's such a like a patriarchal hierarchical
Yeah.
like structure of family. Like your dad is the top, and you don't really like you don't, there's no back and forth. It's one way, and it's
Right.
down, and it's, you're gonna do that, otherwise it's like there's no otherwise.
Yeah.
That's an option that doesn't exist in our culture. And I think when I dare to actually say something, and not just say it but share it, which is also a whole other level of disruption in our culture, which is like privacy, and things that happen in the family are only meant to be for that.
Yeah.
And that was one of the hardest parts to deal with in that, because you know, with my dad, I knew exactly where he came from, and I knew where I came from, and I knew that he didn't mean it was out of love, but that was his way of showing love. But seeing my family caught in the crossfire of like having calls from my sister and my brothers begging me to like take the video down before my dad wakes up, because it was posted with the time difference, and they were like, there was full 9 hours that they were like just begging me to take it down before. They're like, you have the opportunity, it's a fire that like you will put out before it even starts, like if he wakes up and finds this tomorrow, it's over, like all these things. But and Matt actually writes about that moment. It made me cry when I read it, because he just described like, I think there was a friend, you know, our friend Esteban brought a friend who's from Egypt, and he lived here, and so he kind of had understood the situation in a different way, and he was on the train of like, you should take the video down because for your family and all of that. And I just in a moment lost it. I just stood up in the middle of the room, and I just explained that this wasn't just for me. It's for me to respond to my dad. It was for every kid out there who doesn't feel accepted for who they are and for what they want to do, and be who you are and walk freely was like birthed in that moment of feeling so much, and understanding that there are so many people out there like that simply can't be who they are, where they're, you know, where they live, or the families that they come from. And I just hoped that this can be a relief to someone who's living an experience like this.
Yeah. Thank you, man, for sharing that. I think that when you share those vulnerable moments, like that is truly what can be so impactful for people. You're letting people into the very real insight, you know, experience that's happening within yourself and inside yourself. Our parents are loving us the best they know how, and how they think they're loving us. And that comes with its own energies of suppression or repression, or their culture and their background of how they grew up and how their parents raised them. Like there's so much. And so it breeds compassion, but also I'm so proud of you for sticking true to yourself in those times where it's like you know yourself enough to where you know that what you're doing is helping the planet. It's your calling. It's what you want to be doing. And it's unfortunate, but it's been a big part of your lesson, and so it's unfolded perfectly as it has to for your growth and for his growth and for family's growth. Man, it's just so nice to witness.
And
it
I
all.
think a part that I don't think I've touched on before, because obviously like it takes all these years to kind of retroactively see the events and analyze them in a different way. I certainly wouldn't have this deep understanding of who I am today and the freedom that I pursued the journey of understanding myself with if that hadn't happened. Because it was my biggest fear. And once the thing that you fear the most happens and you just live through it and you survive it, it's kind of you go about life with a very different heart. Like you're just so much more. I was so open to doing it all to deeply understand who I am and understand all these memories and traumas that came up that would in no way ever come up if I still had this like regular relationship with my dad where I check, because that's, you know, I was driven by some of his expectations and what he wanted from me and how I should act, so that if he sees something on the internet like that, as much as there was pain in that moment, there was also such freedom to fully own up to my journey and to understanding, well, if I made that decision and I'm not going to be able to have a relationship with my dad over the past 5 years, then I have to make it worth it. Then I have to pursue it from all angles, so that you know when I return, which inshallah it will be November of this year, first time in 5 years, and I've had a few calls with my dad over the years, so things aren't gonna be like he's not fully not talking to me, but it's not the best place. So
Right.
I'm hoping I go back, and now there's a new grounds for reconciliation. I have a nephew now that kind of changed the family dynamic a little bit. My sister had a baby while I was, in the past year, and I go back with a lot more confidence in who I am and what I stand for and what my set of values. And I think, I hope that brings like a next phase in our relationship, and it can allow us to like reconstruct it. I'm not putting a lot of hope on it. I'm just, I go with no expectation. I'm just like wanting to show, all my love and just take the moment of being able to go back after all these years.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, like when you go through your worst fear and you make it on the other side, which for me at that point was like losing a relationship with my role model and hero, my dad, you really get to have a more like fearless attitude and approach towards life.